Emma and James had been together since they were 16 years old. They met in English class when Emma dropped her books and James helped her pick them up. From that day, they were never apart. Now, they were 18, standing together in their school gymnasium on prom night. The large room was decorated with silver streamers that caught the light from the spinning disco ball above. Balloons in gold and silver floated near the ceiling. The DJ played all the popular songs, and students danced and laughed together. But for Emma and James, this night felt different from all the others. Emma wore a simple blue dress that her mother had helped her choose. It matched her eyes perfectly. James wore a black suit with a blue tie that matched Emma's dress. They had planned this together weeks ago, wanting to look perfect for each other on this special night. As the evening went on, Emma tried to push away the sadness that kept creeping into her heart. Tomorrow morning, James would leave for the army. His uniform was already packed and waiting in his bedroom at home. The country was at war overseas, and they needed young men like James to serve. The decision hadn't been easy for James. He could have gone to university like many of his friends. But his father had served in the military, and his grandfather. Before that, James felt it was his duty to serve his country, even though it meant leaving Emma behind. When their favorite song began to play, "Can't Help Myself" by the Four Tops, both Emma and James felt their hearts skip. This was the song that had been playing on the radio during their first kiss 2 years ago. It was the song they always danced to at school dances. It was their song. James reached for Emma's hand and led her to the center of the dance floor. Other couples moved around them, but Emma and James only saw each other. James pulled Emma close, and she rested her head against his chest. She could hear his heart beat, fast and nervous. "I'll write to you every day," James whispered into her ear. His voice was shaking, and Emma could tell he was trying not to cry. "I promise I'll tell you everything that happens, and I'll count the days until I can come back to you." Emma closed her eyes and held him even tighter. She breathed in the scent of his cologne, trying to remember everything about this moment. "And I'll wait for you," she whispered back. "No matter how long it takes, no matter what happens." The song seemed to play forever, but also seemed to end too quickly round them. Other couples laughed and talked about their plans for a university. Some were excited about starting new adventures. Others were sad about leaving friends behind. But Emma and James were facing something much harder than anyone else in that room. When the music finally stopped, they didn't move apart. The gymnasium was slowly emptying as students began to leave for after-prom parties and late-night diners. The DJ was starting to pack up his equipment. The janitor was already sweeping up confetti from the floor. But Emma and James stood in the middle of the dance floor, still holding each other. Neither wanted to let go because they both knew what came next, once they left this gymnasium. Their time together would be measured in hours instead of days or weeks. "This isn't goodbye," James said, though his eyes were filled with tears. He was trying to be strong for Emma, but she could see how scared he was. Not scared of going to war, but scared of leaving her behind. "No," Emma agreed, reaching up to touch his face gently. Her fingers traced along his cheek, and she smiled through her own tears. "This is just see you later, like when you go to work at the grocery store, and I say see you later instead of goodbye." James smiled at this. Emma always knew how to make difficult things feel a little easier. Even now, facing the hardest goodbye of their young lives, she was trying to make it feel less permanent. They walked out of the school hand in hand, their fingers intertwined. James's car was parked under a street light in the nearly empty parking lot. A few other couples were saying their own goodbyes, but Emma and James barely noticed them. They sat in James's car for another hour, talking quietly about everything and nothing. They made promises about letters and phone calls. They talked about the future they would build together when James returned home. They spoke about the house they would buy and the children they would have someday. Neither of them spoke about the fears that kept them awake at night. They didn't talk about what might happen if James didn't come back. They didn't discuss how much they both might change during the time apart. Instead, they focused on love and hope, and the belief that some things are strong enough to survive anything. When James finally drove Emma home, they sat in a driveway for a long time. Her parents had left the porch light on, but they didn't turn on the living room lights. They knew Emma and James needed these last precious moments together. "I love you," James said as Emma finally reached for the door handle. "I love you too," Emma replied, "and I always will." She got out of the car and walked to her front door. She turned to wave one last time before going inside. James waited until she was safely in the house before driving away into the night, not knowing that their love story was just beginning, even though it felt like it was ending. 3 years passed like watching the seasons change outside Emma's bedroom window. At first, the days crawled by slowly, each one feeling like a week, but then suddenly, she would realize that months had gone by without her noticing. Time had a strange way of moving when someone you love is far away. Emma had taken a job at the town library right after James left. The head librarian, Mrs. Patterson, was a kind woman who understood that Emma needed something to keep her mind busy. Emma helped people find books, organized the shelves, and read stories to children during the Saturday morning story time dot in the evenings. Emmy attended classes at the community college just a few miles from her house. She studied English literature because she had always loved reading and because books helped her escape from the loneliness that followed her everywhere. Her teachers said she was a good student, but Emma often found herself staring out the classroom windows, wondering what James was doing at that exact moment, every single day. Emma walked to the mailbox at the end of her street. Her heart would beat faster as she opened the little metal door, hoping to see an envelope with James's handwriting. In the beginning, her hope was always rewarded. James's first letters were long and full of details. He wrote about basic training and how hard it was to wake up at 5 in the morning every day. He told her about the other young men in his unit, boys from all over the country who missed their families just like he missed Emma. He described the food, which he said was terrible, and the drill sergeants, who shouted so much that James's ears rang all day long. Most importantly, James wrote about how much he missed Emma. He missed her laugh and the way she hummed while she cooked. He missed holding her hand during movies and the way she always fell asleep on his shoulder. "I carry your picture everywhere," he wrote. "The other guys are tired of hearing me talk about you, but I can't help it. You're the best part of every day, even when you're not here." Emma kept every single letter in a showbox that she stored under her bed. The showbox had once held her favorite pair of shoes, but now it held something much more precious. When she felt especially lonely, she would pull out the box and read the letters again, starting with the first one and reading them in order. But as the months passed, something began to change. James's letters became shorter. Instead of 3 or 4 pages, they were only 1 page. Then half a page. The stories about his fellow soldiers stopped. The jokes disappeared. The romantic words that used to make Emma's heart flutter became rare. James began writing about things that Emma didn't understand. He mentioned the heat that made everything harder. He wrote about being afraid, but he couldn't explain what scared him the most. Sometimes he would start to tell her about something that happened, But then the letter would end suddenly, as if he had decided not to finish the story. The war is changing me. James wrote in one letter, I don't think about the same things I used to think about. I don't laugh at the same jokes. Sometimes I look in the mirror and don't recognize the person looking back at me. Emma tried to write back with encouragement and love. She told James that she would love him no matter how he changed. She promised that when he came home they would have time to get to know each other again. She sent pictures of herself and wrote about funny things that happened at the library. But James's letters kept getting shorter and sadder. The last letter Emma received was only 3 sentences long. I'm not the same boy who danced with you at prom. I don't want you to wait for someone who might never come back the same. Please live your life and be happy. After that, nothing. Emma kept checking the mailbox every day, but it stayed empty except for bills and advertisements. She wrote letter after letter to James, but none of them were answered. The silence felt louder than any words could have been. Emma's mother, Rose, watched her daughter grow thinner and sadder with each passing week. Emma stopped eating regular meals. She lost interest in her college classes. She spent most of her time sitting by the window, staring down the street as if James might walk round the corner at any moment. One evening, Rose sat down next to Emma on the window seat. Maybe it's time to start living your life again, dear, she said gently, putting her arm round Emma's shoulders. But what if he comes back and I'm not here waiting for him? Emma whispered. What if he thinks I didn't love him enough to wait? Rose was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. Love doesn't work that way, she finally said. Real love wants the other person to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include you. If James truly loves you, he wants you to have a good life, whether he's part of it or not. Emma cried then, letting out all the sadness and fear she had been holding inside for months. Rose held her daughter and let her cry until there were no more tears left. Slowly, Emma began to understand that waiting for someone wasn't the same as living her own life. She started eating regular meals again. She focused on her college studies. She even began to smile sometimes when children at the library laughed at her silly voices during story time. But James's memory stayed with her like a gentle ache in her heart, a reminder of a love that had been real and beautiful, even if it couldn't last forever. 5 years had passed since that last dance in the school gymnasium. Emma had finished her studies at the community college and found work as a music teacher at Willowbrook Primary School. Every morning, she walked into a classroom filled with bright colors and the sound of children's laughter. Emma discovered that working with children brought her a kind of joy she hadn't expected. The little ones didn't know about her broken heart or the letters that had stopped coming. They only knew Miss Emma, who taught them songs and helped them learn to play simple instruments like recorders and tambourines. Music is magic, Emma would tell her students as they sat in a circle on the colorful carpet. It can make you happy when you're sad, calm when you're worried, and brave when you're scared. The children would nod seriously, believing every word she said. Emma found that teaching music helped heal something inside her that she didn't even know was broken. When she played piano for the school concerts or helped nervous children remember the words to their songs, she felt useful and important again. The music didn't bring back painful memories anymore. Instead, it became her way of moving forward. But even though Emma had learned to find joy in her work, her personal life remained quiet and careful. She had tried dating a few men over the years. There was Thomas, whose family owned the bakery on Main Street. He was kind and gentle, always bringing her fresh bread and making her laugh with stories about difficult customers. There was also William, who worked at the town bank. He was serious and responsible, the kind of man who would never leave suddenly or break promises. William took Emma to nice restaurants and always walked her to her door at the end of their dates. Both Thomas and William were good men who cared about Emma. But when they held her hand or pulled her close to dance at town festivals, Emma felt like something important was missing. It was as if she was trying to dance to a song that she could only half remember. The steps didn't feel quite right, and the rhythm seemed off. Emma's friends and family encouraged her to give these relationships more time. You can't compare every man to a memory. Her mother, Rose, would say gently, "James is part of your past now. These men are real and present and want to build a future with you." Emma knew her mother was right. But her heart wouldn't listen to logic. After a while, both Thomas and William found other women to love. Women who could give them the wholehearted affection they deserved. Meanwhile, across the ocean and then back in England, James was fighting battles that no one could see. The war overseas had officially ended, but the war inside James's mind continued every day. He had returned to England 2 years earlier, but he couldn't bring himself to go back to his hometown. Instead, James rented a small flat in Manchester, far away from anyone who might remember the happy boy he used to be. The flat was on the 3rd floor of an old building. It had 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with a window that looked out at a brick wall. James worked the night shift at a factory that made car parts. He chose night work because sleeping had become difficult for him. Loud noises made him jump. Crowded places made him feel trapped. The darkness felt safer somehow, and working while other people slept meant he didn't have to pretend to be normal during conversations. His co-workers were kind enough, but James didn't make friends easily anymore. During his breaks, he would sit alone in the factory cafeteria, eating sandwiches and reading newspapers. He had learned to live with loneliness like it was an old companion that followed him everywhere. Sometimes, when James was walking home from work in the early morning light, he would pass shop windows where radios played music. Once in a while, he would hear "Can't Help Myself" by the Four Tops, the song he had danced to with Emma on their last night together. When that happened, James would stop walking and close his eyes, remembering Emma's blue dress and the way she had smiled at him in the gymnasium lights. But the memories hurt too much to bear. Like pressing on a wound that had never properly healed, he would hurry away, sometimes even crossing the street to escape the music. James had convinced himself that Emma was better off without him. The happy boy who had promised to write every day felt like a stranger to him now. James believed he had nothing good to offer anyone, especially not someone as pure and lovely as Emma had been. Both Emma and James had learned to live with their loneliness, but neither had learned to be truly happy again. They were like two halves of the same song, playing in different keys, creating a melody that didn't quite work but couldn't be completely forgotten either. Emma continued teaching her young students about the magic of music, while James continued working through the night in a city where no one knew his story. They were both healing in their own ways, slowly and carefully, not knowing that life has a strange way of bringing people back together exactly when they're finally ready to try again. Neither of them could have guessed that their paths would cross again soon, in the most ordinary and unexpected way possible. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March when Emma decided to grade her students' music papers at Rosie's Cafe instead of staying late at school. The cafe was warm and cozy, with soft jazz music playing in the background and the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. Emma had always loved this place because it reminded her of simpler times. She had spread her papers across a small table near the window, red pen in hand, writing encouraging comments on her students' work. Little Sarah had written about how music made her feel like flying. Tony had drawn pictures of musical notes with happy faces. These papers always made Emma smile because they reminded her why she loved teaching. The cafe was busier than usual for a weekday afternoon. Office workers grabbed quick coffees, elderly couples shared slices of cake, and university students typed on laptops while sipping tea. Emma barely noticed the noise round her as she focused on her grading. Then she heard it, a laugh that made her heart stop beating for just a moment. It was a sound she hadn't heard in years, but she recognized it immediately. The laugh was quieter than she remembered. A little sadder, perhaps, but unmistakably familiar. Emma looked up slowly, afraid that her mind was playing tricks on her. Across the crowded cafe, at a corner table near the back, sat James. He was talking with an older man who wore a suit and carried a briefcase. The older man seemed to be explaining something serious, pointing at papers spread across their table. James looked different than Emma remembered. He was much thinner now, and his face had sharp angles where it used to be soft and round. There were lines round his eyes that hadn't been there when he was 18. His hair was shorter, almost military style, and he wore simple clothes, a plain sweater and dark jeans. But when James smiled at something the older man said, Emma saw a flash of the boy she had fallen in love with all those years ago. The smile was the same, even if it appeared less often now, as if he could feel someone watching him. James looked up and scanned the cafe. His eyes found Emma's across the room, and time seemed to stop completely. It was just like that moment in the gymnasium when their song had started playing, when the whole world had faded away except for the two of them. Emma's hands began to shake. She put down her red pen and stared at James, hardly believing he was real. James said something to the older man, who nodded and began putting papers back into his briefcase. James stood up slowly, his own hands trembling slightly, and walked across the cafe toward Emma's table. "Hello, Emma," James said when he reached her table. His voice was deeper than she remembered, rougher somehow, but it was definitely him. "Hello, James." Emma whispered. Her voice came out so quietly that James had to lean forward to hear her over the cafe noise. "May I sit down?" James asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak again just yet. James sat down carefully, as if he was afraid the chair might break under his weight. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, trying to match the faces in front of them with the memories they had carried for so many years. "You look well," James said finally. "Different, but well. More grown up, I suppose." "So do you," Emma replied, though she could see that. James looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with needing sleep. "What brings you back to town?" James gestured toward the older man, who was now leaving the cafe. "That was my counselor. We meet here once a month. It's halfway between Manchester, where I live now, and his office. Neutral territory, he calls it." Emma didn't ask what James needed counseling for, but she could guess. The war had changed many young men, and not always in ways that could be easily fixed. "I teach music now," Emma said, pointing to the papers scattered across the table. "At the primary school. The children are wonderful. They remind me every day that the world still has magic in it." James smiled, and for a moment he looked like his younger self again. "That sounds perfect for you. You always loved music more than anything else." "Music helped me," Emma admitted. When your letters stopped coming, music was the only thing that could reach the sad parts of my heart and make them feel better." James's face fell. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I wanted to keep writing, but I didn't know how to explain what was happening to me. The things I saw. The way I was changing. I thought you deserved better than letters full of darkness. I would have understood. Emma said gently, or at least, I would have tried to understand. I'm not the same person who danced with you at prom, James said quietly, looking down at his hands. That boy was full of hope and dreams. I don't even remember what it felt like to be that happy. Emma studied James's face, seeing the pain he carried behind his eyes. Neither am I, she said. I'm not that girl anymore either. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't have to be the same people we were to still care about each other. As if the universe wanted to test them. Their old song began playing on the cafe's radio. Can't Help Myself by the Four Tops filled the air between them. In the past, this song had made James turn away or leave the room. But this time, he didn't look away from Emma. I wrote you letters, James said suddenly, his voice urgent. Hundreds of them. But I never sent them because I thought you deserved better than a broken man. Emma reached across the table without thinking and gently touched James's hand. His skin was rougher than she remembered, marked with small scars, but it was still warm. Maybe we're both a little broken now, she said softly. But broken things can still make beautiful music if they're put together the right way. 6 months had passed since that unexpected meeting at Rosie's Cafe. Emma and James now sat together on the wooden porch swing outside Emma's small cottage, watching the sun set behind the hills. The swing had belonged to Emma's grandmother, and it creaked gently as they rocked back and forth in the evening breeze. They had not rushed back into love like teenagers might have done. Both Emma and James were wiser now, more careful with each other's hearts. They had learned that broken hearts needed time to heal properly, like bones that had been fractured and needed to be set correctly before they could be strong again. In those 6 months, they had met for coffee every week, sometimes twice a week. They took long walks through the town park, talking about everything that had happened during their years apart. Emma told James about the men she had dated and why those relationships had never felt quite right. James shared more about his time in the war and the struggles he faced when he came home. James had started seeing Dr. Richardson, a counselor who specialized in helping soldiers adjust to life after war. At first, James had been reluctant to talk to a stranger about his problems, but Emma had encouraged him gently. And slowly James began to understand that asking for help was not a sign of weakness. Talking to Dr. Richardson is like cleaning out an infected wound, James had explained to Emma one afternoon. It hurts at first, but then it starts to heal properly. Emma had also learned important lessons during their time apart. She discovered that loving someone meant accepting all parts of them, even the parts that were difficult or painful. The James who sat beside her now was different from the boy she had fallen in love with at 16. He had scars that couldn't be seen and memories that still woke him up at night sometimes. But Emma had learned to love this version of James too. I've been thinking, James said one evening as they watched the sky turn from blue to orange to pink. The sunset was particularly beautiful at night, with clouds that looked like they had been painted with watercolors. What have you been thinking about? Emma asked, though she could tell from his voice that he had something important to say. Maybe we could try that dance again, James said, his voice soft but steady. Not the same dance from prom night, but a new dance, one that belongs to who we are now. Emma felt her heart flutter, just like it had when she was 18. But this feeling was different, calmer, more sure. I'd like that very much, she said. Smiling at him, James stood up from the porch swing and offered Emma his hand. She took it without hesitation, and he helped her to her feet. There was no music this time. just the sound of evening birds singing in the oak trees round Emma's cottage. The wind rustled through the leaves, creating its own gentle melody. They moved, slowly and carefully, like they were learning the steps for the first time. James's arms went round Emma's waist, and she rested her hands on his shoulders. They swayed together in the fading light, not really dancing to any particular rhythm, just moving together in a way that felt natural and right. "This feels different," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. "Different good or different bad?" James asked, though he was smiling as he said it, because he could tell from Emma's expression that it was a good kind of different. "Different. Real," Emma said, searching for the right words. "Like we're not pretending to be who we used to be. Like we're not trying to go back to something that doesn't exist anymore." James nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "We're not the same people we were at 18, he said. Maybe that's not a bad thing. They continued to sway, together as the sun disappeared completely behind the hills. The first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, tiny points of light that reminded them both that beautiful things could shine even in the darkness. Over the past 6 months, both Emma and James had found new purposes in their lives. James had started volunteering at a center that helped other soldiers who were struggling to adjust to life after war. He discovered that sharing his own experiences helped both him and the men he counseled. "Helping others heal helps me heal too," he had told Emma. Emma continued teaching music to children, but she had also started a program for adults who wanted to use music as a form of therapy. Some of her students were elderly people who had lost spouses. Others were people dealing with depression or anxiety. Emma found that music could reach parts of the human heart that words alone could not touch. Their love song was different now than it had been when they were teenagers. It was deeper and quieter, with more complex harmonies, but somehow it was more beautiful than before because it was based on real understanding and acceptance rather than just the excitement of young love. As more stars appeared in the night sky, Emma and James danced to the rhythm of their own hearts. They had learned that love was not about trying to go back to the beginning and recapture something that had been lost. Instead, love was about accepting where you are right now and choosing to build something new together. They were finally ready to write a new ending to their story, one that honored both their past and their future.